Hi, my name is Joanna Błońska, and today I'm going to tell you about how to draw a section of the auditorium, how to establish all the lines and measurements, and also I will tell you a little bit how to structure that properly and what are the technical solutions. So we will start from situating the stage, which is usually an element that is raised towards the main floor of the building. So let's think about different points of what we want to show while the performer is on the stage. So depending on the type of performance, we select different point that is the most important one to be exposed from the auditorium. And the first point is usually at the rim of the it is a situation when we are in the theater and we want to show the shoes of an actor. The second point is usually around 40 centimeters from the rim of the stage, and it's usually elevated also by 40 centimeters. Why? If we have an orchestra and it's a full orchestra and somebody plays violin, this is the situation where we want to see the violin. We don't necessarily have to see the shoes of the musician, but it's important to see the instrument and the whole play. So as you know, the seating is usually around 40 centimeters above the stage, so that's kind of another point. Uh, well, if it's a conference, then of course the point can be still deeper into the stage. So it can be about a meter, sometimes it's even 2 meters from the main frame of the stage. And it's usually around the table of the conference room or a place where we are placing the space that the speaker will be standing, and it's usually about 80 centimeters from the floor. We don't really necessarily have to see the details. The most important is the presentation. If the room is multifunctional, then probably we will select some part that is somewhere around the stage, somewhere around the auditorium. So we have several points, and now we have to start to draw the section through the auditorium. So the section through the auditorium usually starts around 2 meters from the border of the stage. Why? Well, of course it can be a meter 10, meter 50. Meter 40 sometimes. It depends on the regulations that you have in your countries for the passage, because it's usually the space for evacuation, and also it depends on what type of venue, how large it is. Sometimes the smaller venues will have smaller space here, but for a standard conference space, large conference space, a concert hall, an auditorium, we assume 2 meters. And usually the first sittings are directly on the floor, so we have just the first sittings here. So the second level for the row, which is raised according to the main floor, is about we will have to establish that. But usually it's about 50 centimeters. But of course, it might be different. We will be able to establish that using our guidelines. So let's see how do we do it. We usually assume that the head of the person sitting is around, it's a standard which doesn't have to apply to every human being, around meter 20. So for simplification, because the chairs are usually inclined, we assume that the head will be around uh, the first row, the first edge of the row. So we draw the head. I have probably draw this part for sitting in an incorrect place, so I'm just going to fix that. Here it is. It's usually like that, definitely. Yes, so that's the sitting. And the head is meter 20. The head height, we assume 12 centimeters. This is the distance between our eyes and between our head. You can of course assume 15 for better visibility, but nowadays people do not have this very high hairdos which occurred in the past. 12 will be definitely okay. And the same thing we are doing for the next row. This distance here from the row to the next one, it depends on the evacuation, it depends on the largest of your space, and it depends on what you have drawn. But usually it holds up between 190 to 100 centimeters. This is a standard. It doesn't necessarily have to be exactly like that. And let's go back to the green color. I think it will be a different green color this time. And we have another meter 20. And we have another point and another head. So, of course, the calculation of the meter 20 is from the height of the elevated space floor of the next row. And we check if our viewers see every point that we have designed, if we need every point. If we don't need every point, this should be, of course, the straight line. And if we don't need every point, we check the different point that we've seen, that we've created. So the important thing is exactly here. We have to make sure that the line from one head doesn't meet the line from other head. I am of course hand drawing now, so it's not so precise, and I advise you to do it in AutoCAD or ArchiCAD or whatever other architectural applications and software you are using. So uh, of course, here we assume that I have followed exactly these proper regulations and that the heads do not overcross. If it's a situation like that, then I am just able to draw the next rows according to this 15 centimeters here. Why 15 centimeters? Why not 12? Why not 12? Well, not 12 because we need a little bit of this additional space. And the other thing is that it's a comfortable way of measuring the steps. And in a second, you'll know why. So in some situation, of course, there will be a situation that the middle of my head will intersect, like here, will intersect with the head. So in that way you are sure that the viewer is screening the other viewer from seeing the things that are going on the stage. In that kind of situation, you have to add additional height to the row, which is very simple because we just draw it 30 centimeters high. And in that way, our head bumps into 30 centimeters, and we again can see the point that we are aiming at. And then we are drawing the next row, of course, keeping the firstly calculated wideness, which differs, but that will be a part of different lecture. And in that way, we can have steps of 45 centimeters, of 30 centimeters, of 15 centimeters. And in that situation, it's very easy because I'm just adding for general communication and movement 15 centimeter steps, and for 45 we have 2 additional steps of 15 centimeters. So as you can see, it's a very simple and very feasible way of creating the height of the stage. How do we structure this kind of auditorium? Well, in this kind of auditorium, we will definitely not fill all of that space with some sort of heavy structural material. So there are different methods, but all they assume that this space should be more or less empty. So you can either create this as a thin shell concrete poured structure, of course reinforced, and the structural engineer will tell you how much of this concrete should there be. And it of course also depends on if you are using the fiber, if you are using a typical reinforcement. So it will be different in different situations. And the minimum, of course, would be 8 centimeters because we cannot go lower with that. So this is the minimum, and it might be a little bit thicker. And this structure can be supported by concrete beams, which again will create a grill structure. So there would be no situation in which you have too much concrete or concrete slabs here. So they'd probably be more or less created in this sort of structure. And the other method, which is very beneficial and it's even lighter, is when you have this aforementioned concrete structure. And of course, it doesn't necessarily have to be concrete. It can be some sort of steel structure that you are using. This is the cross section of the element. The steel structure, of course, have to be fireproofed, so it has to be covered with special paints or foams which are preventing the fire from occurring, and also most of all they are preventing from their losing of their load-bearing construction if the fire occurs. And it can still be a concrete structure, it's fine. And then we are using additional steel substructure, which will be also very light, and it also will be in a form of a grill, so it will have this type of network here. And sorry for my ugly drawing. And above that, we are using the load bearing for taking the load from people walking and sitting. We have to use additional boards, and there are different solutions. I have in similar situation, I have just used fireproofed boards from fiber cement, and of course there will probably 2 or 3 layers of that boards, and their thickness ranges from 1 centimeter and a half to 2 centimeters. You of course have to ask your structural engineer to calculate that depending on the amount of people that you're expecting. And of course, here you can use different types of flooring. It can be absolutely all the types of floorings that are allowed for public buildings. But of course, carpeting here will prevent stairs from being heard. If you are changing one fruit from another, of course, some of that sound will be absorbed by the carpeting. And here, usually there is a mineral wool for extra isolation, so that the space from under will not radiate any sound to the space over, and of course in the other way. And there are some gypsum boards here, of course also fire protected, which can be mounted to substructure or directly to a steel structure depending on their span. Usually it will be additional steel substructure because the span of these beams will be rather too large for gypsum board structure. So more or less the general proposal of the auditorium solution. Thank you so much.